Voila, we're back.
We're back. It's been a busy 24 hours on the Twitter timeline.
It sure has.
And that has directly inspired this episode. Do you want to tell people what occurred yesterday, May 1st?
Well, I know we talked about it, I think, an episode or two ago, but it's official now. The Writers Guild has gone on strike, and
The girls said we're done.
the girls have picked up their pickets, have put it outside of the offices of Netflix, HBO, Sony, and Warner.
Paramount. Jay Leno showed up with donuts. I said, okay.
Yep.
Mr. I'm retired. I don't care if y'all cancel these talk shows because I wasn't going to be working. And I don't know if you saw, there was a tweet where someone had a picket sign that was like, basically like, get it together or we'll spoil Succession.
I literally was dying when I saw
and
that.
Someone
I was like, all right, relax.
Yes, and they were like, enough, pay the people what they want.
I was like, this is where I draw the line.
I was like, not this being the sign that ended 1,000 wars. You know what I mean? Like, just because y'all want to know how White Empire ends.
I'm going to need you to stop calling it.
It's White Empire. I'm sorry. It's giving, Cookie Lyons, but Cookie Lyons is Shiv Roy, also in an ill-fitting outfit.
The work has stopped as of May 1st.
Yep, and we are recording this on May 2nd, so it's
been 24 hours now.
Yeah. They're done.
I mean, honestly, we sort of like previewed this and we knew this was coming, and maybe there was a really strong chance. But the question I've been getting today from a lot of my friends that are not in the industry is like, what does this mean for me? I was like, first of all, show some solidarity, first of all.
I have a personal trainer.
Before you worry about whether or not you're going to be able to watch your shows.
I mean, I have a personal trainer, and today she had me doing like some squats, and in between like wheezing between like squats within the rep, I was like, TVs, writers are on strike. And she is like on Zoom and she's like talking to me and she's like, okay, so like, what do I mean? And I'm like, no more Abbott Elementary.
Right. That was like the one thing I said to everyone today, and they're like, oh no.
I know. Well, it's so funny. I think it was either Variety or Deadline, but one of them did a thing, like a post where they were like a running list of all the shows that will be delayed, basically, because of, the strike. And so far it's like, obviously there's tons of shows that could in theory be impacted, but I think right now, if I had to guess, it was like 7 or 8 shows, just because those were shows where maybe they had spoken to someone. Like Brittany Nichols is a writer I do follow on Twitter, and she was quoted in basically being like, yeah, Abbott is a show where like we are writing episodes while we're in production. And so 100%. The further that we start, shortened seasons, shortened storylines, the fans are going to be upset. And so I get it.
For audiences that especially watch shows that are on big networks, and that includes, CBS, Fox, your FBI's, your Chicago Fires, your late night TV, even though I feel like a lot of people in our age range don't even really watch late night TV.
We just get clips.
SNL.
We just get clips.
We just like go on YouTube and watch clips. So that part will be different, but those shows that are on cable TV and broadcast TV are immediately impacted, right? And I think to a lot of what you're saying, it's going to be short. Abbott's going to have a shortened season, depending on how far this goes, right?
I mean, their writers'
if the strike ends in September,
right? Still talking. Go ahead.
Like if this strike ends in September, it's definitely going to affect Abbott. You're going to see a shortened season.
Well, their writers' room is supposed to start literally tomorrow.
It's going to be a lot of reruns for that.
I mean, we're going to get 30 seasons of Love is Blind now, so that is good or bad.
And the way y'all went up for that, I'm sure y'all will be fine, because, oh my God.
I know. Listen, don't get mad, because pretty soon you're going to have to watch it. Like, T-minus a few, one last week until Sankara is watching all Discovery's content on Max. uh, anyway, so yeah, it's really interesting,
Yeah, I
seeing
mean, that's
this
the
play out.
TLDR of it. The TLDR is if you're a Netflix watcher, you probably won't feel it probably for another 4 months if
Yeah,
it goes that long.
because the
Um,
last one was 3 months.
yeah, what about 100 days, I think it was.
Yeah, it was, late 2007 into early 2008. But yeah, that was
Right.
the last one, so
Let's hope it doesn't go that long.
yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about these negotiations and, how they work, but,
Yeah.
obviously.
What I'm predicting happens,
Come
and
on,
this is like
come on,
best
insider.
case scenario,
Yeah, what's up?
is the SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, and the Directors Guild is also their contracts are about to be up, and
Ah,
I'm predicting they're all gonna band together as a
okay.
show of solidarity, which is gonna force
Ah,
like an actual work
ooh.
stoppage where like actors can't work and
Mm, mhm,
directors are
mhm,
not
mhm,
working.
mhm.
So now the studios have to come to the table sooner than they would like.
Well, and I was telling my trainer again as I was like wheezing between like sit ups. I was like, the only shows that are going to keep coming out consistently are going to be Tyler Perry Productions and Sam Levinson.
See?
Well, because they
Look at the visionary. Tyler Perry said, "That's why I don't got no writers."
okay. He said, y'all clowned me for all of my plot holes and literally everything I've ever written that makes no sense. But guess who's going to keep getting this back during this strike? Me, myself, and I, because I can't go on strike if I'm the writer and the director and the showrunner and the producer and the editor and the studio and the budget and stunts
It's
and
crazy.
services. Like,
What a crazy man.
I mean, is he crazy? Because he's gonna be still cashing them checks to go buy BET. So
He sure is about to do that.
sure, listen, I'm like, ugh, uh, it's gonna be Tyler Perry's network, but Uh, that and because all of his stuff is on BET and OWN, which is kind of crazy, which is Max. So,
Right.
anyway, those are
Anyway,
our notes on the
we
current
stand
state. Yes,
in solidarity with the writers, and I hope they get all their coins because I want them to get paid.
I have friends who are writers, and I'm like, I want you to
Same.
live your best life. Let's go
Yeah,
on
I
a
want people to have a
vacation.
livable wage.
Let's get
What they're asking
yeah.
for is to work a livable wage.
It's truly nothing too crazy, nothing insane, like
That's it.
nothing big. But this episode, ironically, is going to focus on sort of this idea. Is it's not we're not dragging the writers for this because they're simply employed. This is again a dragging of the studios, but like kind of this idea that it often feels like there aren't any new original ideas being made in Hollywood anymore. I feel like when I think about what's on TV, so much of it feels like it's an adaptation of something that already exists, that I've already seen before. Do you feel that way?
100%. Yes, the dreaded based on the true story in every time I watch something.
And if you were to explain what an adaptation is, how would you describe it?
Well, to me, when I think of adaptations, so like I'll give you the Sankara
Yeah,
definition and then the professional.
yeah.
To me, when I see adaptation, I think this is some nigga wrote this and it made its way on screen. That used to be my thinking. And then over time,
Okay. I was like, okay.
and then and then over time that started to change
Okay.
because like a lot I we started seeing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I started seeing more stuff like, oh, this is from a video game or something like that, or there are different types of adaptations.
Okay.
And then I guess the definition of adaptation is basically like a transfer of work or story
Yeah.
to a film or a TV series.
So like it starts out as one thing and then it kind of gets flipped
Right.
into a film or a TV series. And that thing it starts
Correct.
out as it can be a bunch of different things. And, I think we'll get into
Right.
some of those. Do you have any sort of concerns when you see something's an adaptation? Do you have things that make you excited? Like, what comes to mind when you hear that there's going to be a new adaptation of something?
It's so funny because when in 2023, when I think of adaptation, I immediately, and I think this is a trauma response, I go to Game of Thrones
Okay.
and how when those two guys stopped having the books to
Hmm,
reference,
hmm.
the show got way worse.
Yeah.
That's like my trauma response when it comes to adaptations because I always think of like, oh, okay, well, these people are following a source material, and so like a lot of the work has already been done in terms of like setting up the world and stuff like that. And granted, like a lot of it, like they change up the dialogue and add characters here, add characters there,
Right.
but like the bulk of the story is already there, and they just sort of lift that and turn it into a screenplay for either TV or the silver screen.
So, and it sounds like your biggest thing is like, is the source material completely finished? Like,
Yes.
it's fine if it's not. Maybe then I just gotta wait till the hop on. I can't get
Or
invested
how closely is the source material being followed?
anyway. Like, period.
Yeah, and Imma tell you right now, I don't read, so I can't tell you the last that's not true. Well, yeah, I actually can't tell you the last fiction book I've
Okay.
read.
Okay.
And so it's tough for me, like, a lot of times people say, "Oh, this was adapted from a book," and I'm like, "I don't know that."
It literally has nothing to do with me at all. Uh
Like, they could be lying to me, I wouldn't know.
I read a lot of articles. I don't read a ton of books because I don't have the attention span. But I think there's interesting ways that people adapt things, right? Like I think sometimes you know, well, I should say this. I think there's different ways that they do it, and I just need to like level set my expectation of like what the amount of faithfulness is and like how we're building that out. And if I know that in the
Yeah.
beginning, then cool. So like for instance, I have not read Bridgerton, right? But
Mhm.
people, are kind of like, oh, well, this is like pretty aligned to the book, but it doesn't seem like it's like also like a one for one, everything is the exact same. Like they understand,
Mhm.
like, okay, there's 8 books because there's 8 Bridgerton children, and each, you know, the book follows sort of, their marriage, off of, the marrying off of one of the kids. And so,
Yeah.
I think that, okay, we can now come to the show and we see the first season, and a lot of people like I don't even think read the books, which also I think is another thing that maybe adds into this a little bit. Is like how crazy is
Mhm.
the fan base about the source material? Because I feel like a lot of people didn't read Bridgerton, so like they were not going up and off about any types of
Yeah.
variation. But something
Right.
like obviously, like we see this a lot with like nerds, right? In fantasy,
Yeah.
where like
Uh-huh.
a black person, you're like, first of all, they're mermaids. Like, chill out. First of all, the Hobbit, like,
Relax. You'll be
these
alright.
are not even real people. Please touch grass
Yes.
and leave us alone. But like, that's a fan base. Like, nerds are such like sticklers to source material that like I'm just like, you're now ruining this because we can't even just
For
watch it
everyone
in
else.
silence, right? Like, let
Yeah.
us have peace. Um, but yeah, I think that like if it's established like, oh, like this is a whole series or this is a whole book, and we're gonna make the first season align exactly to the book, and then the second season we're gonna like do something a little bit different. Like if I know that, then I can go in and be a lot more chill. As
Yeah.
opposed to Game of Thrones, where, like you said, they were outpacing the books being written. And then when everyone figured out, oh, this is how, this is going to end, who's on the throne, as showrunners, they got upset that people predicted it. And I'm like, this isn't even your story to tell. Like, if George is cool, then you need to be cool. And look at
Right.
you trying to be cute.
Yeah,
Ruin
and
the
I think that's
legacy.
like that is in the Hall of Fame of fumbling a bag
True.
because that show was gonna go down as probably like the greatest show ever, and like it soured the
Yeah.
world to an extent that I had never seen. I didn't even think that was possible.
That everyone everywhere was like, "What was
Yeah,
season
to the point where, like,
7?"
they had to go into hiding because, like, they had other shows that they were gonna make, and they never made
Yeah.
them.
I mean, they've basically lost the trust. You
Yeah,
know what else
completely.
I think is kind of another thing that we should think about with adaptations that I had never considered actually until this week. Um, Judy Blume wrote these books or a book. I don't know. I did not read these are not my books as kids, but she wrote a book called Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Please don't ask me what it's about. I think it's coming of age. I think it's adolescence of like a, white 12-year-old girl. I really don't know. But I saw this tweet that was like this woman being like, I don't know who decided to release this movie at this particular point in time because the target audience of this film is like women in their like 40s who are like teachers, right? Like we're like academics, right? Like this was a book we read as kids and like you needed to release this in the summer because that's when we're free and we would have bought
Yeah,
all the tickets. And I was like,
yeah.
oh, that's so interesting. Like I don't think I've ever really thought about like how has like the source material I think we think about like how have problematic parts of source materials aged and
Mhm,
like you remove those
mhm.
from the adaptation. But like also I'm like, wow, do we need to like start thinking about like who is this for, right? Is this for the people who
Yeah,
enjoyed this thing when it first came out, or is it for new audiences? And like, how
mhm.
do we adapt to the sensibilities of the original audience who's now older if that's the route you choose to go?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
like I
yeah.
was like, that's so true. Like releasing this film, if it's for women who are, nurses for, in their 40s, even their parents, right? Like they are working. Those kids are still in school. You got to get them at the summertime,
Mhm.
when the kids are out on summer break and they say, maybe I'll take a week off here, sneak off, go to the movie by myself. And I just was like, wow, like thinking about how your audience has changed since the source material is something I'd never really thought
That's
about.
a really great point.
Yeah.
I never e I ne I guess I only think about that when it comes to, like, certain types of movies, like action
Yeah.
movies and stuff, but I never really thought about that from a adaptation
Yeah.
perspective. But that does make sense though, because, like, if you're trying to maximize your audience, especially if it's like you're releasing this for a specific audience, like, you should probably cater that, like,
Hmm.
release to when they're most available
Yeah.
to
But also
watch it.
like just like where they're at in their lives. Like I think we spend so much time being like, how do we adapt this to the current time? But it's like, but how do you
Yep.
adapt this to your audience and who they are now versus who they were then, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
like trigger nostalgia and emotions and feelings of the past with like,
Mhm.
the people who read this book, when it came out in like the 80s or 90s or whatever, like, how do we like tap into what they were feeling at that time now that they're in a different stage? So,
Yeah, and this isn't an adaptation, but this is how exactly how I feel about, Stranger
okay.
Things, because Stranger Things taps into that nostalgia of
Right.
the '80s
Right.
and also almost always releases, like, either in the
Yeah.
summer or during Halloween because they know, like, Stranger Things is either scary or, like, there are parts of, like, summer storylines that they have in there. I think it was, like, season 2 and 3. Um, so yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that point.
Adaptation and date releases actually matter.
They work,
Yeah.
man.
I mean, I don't I also think too that like I don't watch Stranger Things. It's too much. It's too dark for me. But
You missing
I'm okay
out.
because I'm not missing out on sleep. That's how I feel. Uh, like I'm good. But I do think it's interesting too because like I think that like summertime as an adult, like summer feels so nostalgic of childhood, right? Because you're just like
Mhm.
as an adult, you're like, wow, remember when I used to like be outside, smelling like outside, running around, scraping up my
Mhm.
knee. And so like to have a show like Stranger Things that's in the 80s, right? That like is kind of designed in theory for like a audience of millennials, probably. You know what I mean? Like
For
I think
sure.
it gets picked up because of like culture, like the cultural zeitgeist, like is talking about it, like so other generations are into it. But I'm like, yeah, like tap into that by like you said, those summertime releases and those summertime storylines, like really playing that up. So it's like if we see that in non adaptations, then we definitely need to think about that in adaptations. But let's shift a little bit and let's talk about like what are the types of adaptations that you've seen recently. Um,
Hmm. Well, the most recent one for
mhm,
me is video game
okay,
adaptation. And it would be The Last of Us. Now it's not the first of its kind, but I think it's the first one to be done so well that it has sort of like crossed the Venn diagram and no longer like just the
right.
nerds and the gamers. Now like everyone watches the show and it's done so well where like even if you didn't play the game, you can sort of pick this
Hmm.
up. Um and to my point earlier when I was sort of like defining what an adaptation is, I feel like we're moving into an era where like a lot of things can be adapted.
Yeah.
And so The Last of Us being a video game one, and another one I can think off like off top is podcast adaptations. I've seen that a lot.
Ugh.
The two that stick to me the most
Ugh.
is The Dropout,
Yeah.
and The Shrink Next
Hmm.
Door, which is on Apple
Hmm.
TV. Um, two of which that it's so weird to think like, oh, now we're even at the point where like we're adapting podcast
Yeah.
series into live action, and they're working. That's the thing about it too, right? Like Sis won an Emmy,
I
didn't she?
mean,
So
yeah. I mean, she was serving a Scamarillness. Uh, yeah, I'm not a big video gamer, but didn't Halo also get an adaptation?
yes, so Halo got one I think last
Did you
year.
watch it?
Um, I watched one episode, but I didn't
Okay,
like it.
why was that?
Which is why I had well, I just didn't think it was well done enough. And to your prerequisites of things to consider when doing an adaptation, I don't think it stayed faithful enough to the source material to be good. Um, I didn't want it to be like a one to one faithfulness, but like the storylines were almost very different. They like changed who the main character was in a sense that of like that's not, and it like didn't work.
Okay, wait.
Right? I try to give things
Okay.
chances, but it just didn't work.
I'm confused. Sorry. Pull over. Okay, so I don't play video games. I didn't know that Halo like had a true storyline. I thought it was just like we're gonna build like a world. We're gonna set you up with a context, and now you are a shooter, and that's all I know. Like,
No, it had a story.
does it feel like it's a story that's again? I don't play video games, so, but it sounds like
Uh huh.
people excuse me, are like, "Oh, like, it's kinda crazy, The Last of Us is, like, so close, like, to the game," which makes me interpret The Last of Us as being, like, very storyline throughout the entire gameplay
Mm-hmm.
the entire gameplay experience.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that Halo's storyline, is comparable and that, like, there's a through, the entire experience sort of storyline that, like, "Oh, these are checkpoints?" Um,
Yes. Now, The Last of Us as a video
yeah,
game has probably some of the best writing you've ever find in a video
okay.
game. Like that actually was made for TV. I can see why HBO is the one that picked that up because like the writing is so good. It's comparable to like their Game of Thrones and The Wire shows. So that made sense. Most video games, and I think that's what people don't know, people that play most video games have
Okay.
storylines, right? They might not be as
Okay.
robust as The Last of Us, but they have a through line from like Halo 1 all the way to Halo 5. There's a main character. The main character has a journey, right?
Okay.
Like in the midst of all the fighting, there's like a journey that the main character goes
Okay.
through.
Cause yeah, I feel like the last time I, like, played a video game was, like, a Grand Theft Auto, and it's like, we're here, we're stealing, we're doing mini missions, you know what I mean? And I guess in theory, like, mini
Yeah.
missions of, like, being a miscreant and a menace to society, sort of, threads together into a storyline, like, maybe I just never thought of it that way. But yeah, I'm not a
Yeah.
gamer, so I felt like I feel like when people talked about The Last of Us, it sounded like, oh, there's a story in the game that feels really full, and so
Mhm.
that's, you
Mhm.
know, also part of the
Yeah.
joy,
And
but Halo didn't feel that way to me as an outsider.
no, and I would say that's like a from the I wouldn't say from the 2010s to now, video games have become way more
Mhm.
robust into their writing, where like actual screenwriters are writing these games, which is why they feel robust. So like there's a bunch of other games that are coming
Oh,
that are being
okay.
adapted um
Shut me
that
up.
have just as robust storylines as The Last of Us because they're good enough to be on screen. Now, will they be adapted as well? I don't know.
Okay, final
That's
question.
TBD.
When did Halo come out?
Last
No,
year, I
sorry,
believe,
the original
2021.
game.
Oh, I mean, Halo came out in like the early
Okay,
2000s,
so
I
it
think.
predates like the type of story development that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we talked about video games a little bit. Um, I know that you famously don't read, and I also famously don't read books. I read some books, but none of these books. Let's talk about books to live action. So,
Yes. I love those. I
okay,
mean, there's a lot of some of my fave things in
like
there.
what?
Um, Game of
Oh
Thrones
yeah, I
being one of
forgot.
them.
How could I?
Um, Station 11 being
Oh,
another.
sad over there, but okay.
I be telling you, I'm all about trauma
And
TV,
I am literally
baby.
like, my life is hard enough. I am not watching Station 11. I didn't see it. I just was like, I can't.
Oh wow, you missed out on a
Did
10
I
out of
miss out
10
on being sad?
TV.
No. Why? Because we were living through a global pandemic, and I was like,
When I tell you that show is
I
depressing,
was like, why are y'all
but man, I
cosplaying
ate that
reality?
up.
Just turn on the news, please. I'm literally dodging Apple News notifications, and y'all are like, tap, tap, tap in. I'm like, this is mental. Mental. I want problems that are not mine.
That's where I live, baby.
Oh
Trauma
my
TV is where I
gosh. I'm like,
live.
give me a slavery something while I'm sitting on my couch in air conditioning. Like, I don't need to be living the mess. Which actually,
So yes, book to live action is like one of my favorite things. Even though like so funny enough, I do the opposite. So like when I watch it, if I like it enough, I'll buy the
do
book.
you read it?
So I've Station
Oh,
11,
wow.
yes. I I, I do the other
Wow.
way.
Somebody pull up a news ticker. This just in. Man who claims he doesn't read books, read a book after being
I
depressed on
I don't
TV to be depressed in his head.
all the all the books that I read are like biographies and nonfiction. I just don't read fiction books like I used to when I
Love a
was a kid.
fiction book. I really loved an instance where I loved it, but I could not with the adaptation was Underground Railroad, actually. I don't know if,
The
yeah,
Barry
Barry
Jenkins.
Jenkins was, you know,
Oop, didn't read that. Love the
I loved
adaptation.
the book.
Another trauma
Yeah, but
TV.
and I think that
Woo.
was why I was like, there's something different about like watching this, right? And I think, and maybe I don't know, maybe that's also it. Like I read fiction books, but I don't read them very frequently. I'm a big audiobook girly, but I feel like
Mhm.
seeing something in my head and then, reconciling with it in, what choices are made with
Mhm.
casting and with, direction. Like I feel like Barry Jenkins, I was like, I don't need the moonlight treatment applied to slavery, right? Like I don't need a beautiful looking slave scene. I'm good off that. Like,
I was
no,
eating
I'm
it
like,
up.
just
I said
give me
yes.
regular, degular, just slave representation. Don't make it pretty. Like I watched,
He was trying to tell you that they had humanity too. They were seen outside of just being
you know,
slaves.
and I know that. I knows it. I knows that's true. But I just was like looking at this in this way is a little too much, and I'm out. But you know what I did watch, which is an interesting kind of take on that. I watched Kindred, which is based off of the book by
Mhm.
Octavia Butler. And I did not read the
Mhm.
book. Ironically enough, I watched the show, and then my friend who I watched it with was like, "I'm gonna read the book." And then she read the book and she was like, "Whoa, could have done without that." And I was like, "Girl, nobody told you to go pick it up." But something that was really interesting is the first season of the show, sorry, because it was touted as like a limited series, I think. But that season was
Mhm.
only the first half of the book. And I was
Oh.
like, this is a risky choice because you're assuming you're going to get picked up for season two. And it was interesting because I did a lot of like reading and research on the source material. In the book, it's basically
Mhm.
about a woman who keeps time jumping back to the 1800s, to a plantation that essentially, through the course of the story, you kind of figure out there's like a relationship between her familial history and, this plantation she keeps jumping back to. And what's really
Mhm.
interesting is in the book, the present day is set when the book was written in like 1975, 76. And she is married
Mhm.
to a white man who often kind of does these time jumps with her. And then in the
Okay.
TV adaptation, present day is 2016. And
Ah.
instead of her, like the man she's with, he is not her husband, he is her one night stand. And so, something that's really
Ah.
interesting about this adaptation, and my friend and I talked about this a lot, is like, it's kind of interesting, right? Because in the context of a marriage and like being married to this white man, like, I understand why he's jumping back in time with you because you're his wife. But like, what's the
Mhm.
motivation for that when y'all just like met and then hooked up? You know what I mean? Like, imagine you have a one
Mhm.
night stand and
Mhm.
next thing you know, you are in a plantation and you're stuck there for 8 years. Like, whoa, this is crazy.
That's crazy.
Right? So, like, it is
No
an
thanks.
interesting choice because, like, the adaptation is doing something different and it does make you as the viewer, I do think that's kind of a plot hole, but like it does make you as the viewer like reconcile the story in a very different way, right? Like what would motivate you?
Did you like it?
Um yeah, actually I did like it. I chose not to read the book cuz I already knew the vibe was downer. And so I was like, why would I read this? I'm not going to do that. But I did read the Wikipedia sort of like note to sort of see, how it plays out in the event that it doesn't get picked up, like how the original story.
Mhm.
Um, but
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, I liked that. And that's kind of the point that I think I was making earlier without even realizing it. Like, you have to think about who your audience is and make it relatable. And I think that like this is a Hulu, like it's a FX of Hulu. You know what I mean? Potato potato. Um,
Mhm.
and their audience is like me, the millennial. And so like modernizing the present day to being 2016 did do something different than I
Yeah.
think if it was in 1976, you
No,
know?
for sure. I agree
So,
with that. I think that was a calculated move,
yeah,
especially 2016
exactly.
specifically.
Wow, you had to be there, and if you were there, if you know, you know. It was a wow. It
It
was a
was
ti
a
I mean, we're
time.
still we're
It
still in
was a
it, but
time.
that was when the time started, and
Right.
it was spooky season. Wow, the girls were CRT'd out. But also,
Mhm.
okay, let's talk about some other books to live actions and like sort of what we think. Okay. We also have Little Fires Everywhere. What did you think of that?
Again, it's another one. I A lot of these, I I did not read
Hmm.
the book for that. But I do remember people saying, like kind of bringing up the similarities and to the book. That's the thing with like specifically books, right? That I think is different than the other types of adaptation. The other types of adaptation, I feel like uh, they don't get as much because a lot of people again read.
We.
And so they're like, this is not how they did it
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
book. And I did not. it's seldom I have not felt what that was like until I watched Last of Us. Like the feeling of knowing a source material so
Okay.
well that you're gonna pick up on the
Yeah.
slightest change, right? Um, and I never really like I always used to say like, "Oh, let the creator be the creator." Like like yes, they adapt the work, but they also have creative license to adapt it in a way that they think fit the story they're telling in the new medium. Because sometimes some things in a book will work, but it won't
Right.
work in live action.
Mhm.
Um and I feel like a lot of the book adaptations, Little Fires Everywhere included, I saw a lot of this was a little different than how it was in the book. Like I know that's also famous for like Harry Potter
Mhm.
and like people are like, "Oh, they like dove way deeper in this in the book." And in the movie it's a little different. Um but again, fine by me. I ain't read it.
I feel like this next one, there's not too much to talk about, but like, let's do it anyway. Social media adaptations. And with that, I think the only thing I can really think of is Zola.
Yeah, I
Is
think
there
that's
anything
the
else?
biggest one.
Yeah,
Um
talk about it.
Again, I think it's another to our point, like the adaptation word is being applied to a lot of things in the 2020s. Um and I think a lot of it is because a lot of things can get turned into stories, right? And
Mhm.
there's the famous like people on Twitter, Black Twitter, always love to do the fan castings one or fan
Yes,
stories. Um
I love them.
and that's sort of like a step beyond that where someone told a story on Twitter and a bunch of people in a studio was like, "Yo, we could turn that into a movie because this was entertaining enough." Um, I think there's gonna be more of this. I think Zola definitely set a precedent. And I know we talked about podcasts, but the podcast to me also set a precedent where like a lot of things nowadays can get turned into some sort of adaptation, either a movie or TV. And really, if you think about it, that's kind of like how things work, right? Like a book idea only derives from someone having an idea. The only difference is Zola, that person put it on a social media app. So it was only like it was inevitable that, and I think Twitter is unique where Twitter, it's
Right.
like it's a piece of written content where that's
Mhm.
different than like TikTok or Instagram. Um,
Right.
where you can like go on Twitter, read the whole thread, and then formulate a story out of that. Really,
Well, I would push back a little bit and say that, like, the thing about Twitter that's different than a book is, like, it's very clear, like, who owns the rights of a book, right?
hmm
Like, the author, right? But, like, it also feels like because there's like a formalization process from you being like, I have an idea to like, I don't need to write this out to like, I don't need to publish this. And like publishing it kind of is like, okay, like that's like sort of the version of like filing a patent, right?
hmm
Like for an invention. You're like, well, I've published it. So my story, my idea, my name, and it's locked in,
for
loaded.
sure.
But I feel like with Zola and it's kind of interesting because this played out a lot behind the scenes, but like there is no really formalization process, right? Like you write a tweet and you hit
Yep,
send and like who owns that tweet? Do you own that tweet? Does Twitter own that tweet? And like, I think about like a lot of news now, like it incorporates and embeds tweets into
for sure.
stories, and people that are like unfamiliar or that are like ignorant to how this works will be like, I didn't say you could use my tweet in your article. And it's like, sweetie, they didn't have to ask you. Like, this is not a book. Like, that's
hmm
not how this works.
hmm
And so the thing that ends up happening with Zola that's kind of interesting, is Zola happens as tweets. And then a writer comes in from Rolling Stone and then writes an article, and then that article is what gets sold
Mhm.
to then be made
Mhm.
into the screenplay.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've told you this story before. I think I have, but like, I went to go see Zola, and this girl made me take her picture outside of the film, like the poster outside of the theater, because she's like, "This is my dad's movie." And it wasn't until I was in the movie and the credits are rolling that I realized that her dad is the guy that wrote the article.
Mhm.
And so she believes that this is his
Yeah.
movie. And I would assume that Isaiah King, aka Zola, would argue, wait a minute, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's
Um,
perfect segue into the articles because you're right. I think
yeah.
it gives it like the articles are almost as clear cut as books or video
Hmm.
games or podcasts because you can point to, hey, this person wrote this article. Um, and I feel like articles are another one where like it's running rampant. I feel like we're gonna see a lot more. Um,
Yeah, we're gonna so many articles, articles,
like
articles,
there's it's
articles.
gonna be so many articles turned into shows and
Sheesh.
movies.
Let me go write an article. We playing. Cut off the mic, pick up the pen,
Break
and
some
get to
news right
work.
now. See if it don't get
I
picked
mean,
up.
the thing too that articles, okay, I feel like books are like the nonfiction adaptation, right? And
Mhm.
the fiction adaptation. The articles are like nonfiction adaptations, right? But I think the thing that's so interesting that we see, when trying to take nonfiction articles and then they are adapted, is that there seems to be such a spectrum of like what's real, what's not, people contesting things. I feel like when articles are written, they have their fact checks,
Yep.
by the publication. But then it's like you can get something like The Cut wrote that article about Anna Delvey, right?
Right.
And then they kind of did a quasi fictionalized
Yeah.
dramatization for Inventing Anna, which is very different than, I don't know, something that, well, actually, I don't know. Maybe the other examples I think of are similar to that too, but like I don't feel like you didn't watch Inventing Anna. I feel like you very specifically were like, this is bad. And I
Chill
was like,
out. I watched the
I
first
mean,
3 episodes.
oh, I'm so sorry. Let me be clear. I think it was horrible. And I'm someone that has a scam podcast, read the article the day it came out, have been following Anna Delvey. My mom sends me updates when this girl's about to get released from prison. Like, I'm very in it, right?
I thought I
But
I thought the Netflix documentary was way better than the show.
I'm like, there's a
Yeah,
documentary?
they did a documentary on her.
Who?
This was a while ago.
Okay. Well, one of the one something about this is really interesting. Okay. One of the girls, too long don't read, Anna Delvey, pretending to be a German heiress, not an heiress of anything at all, has conned big, big, big money into starting a like art
Yep.
thing, and it was all a scam. And part of also what she was doing was kind of scamming like her friends to like live an opulent lifestyle. And so she ends up meeting this girl who works at Vanity Fair, and the two of them go on a trip to Marrakesh, Morocco. And Anna was like, "Oof, I don't have the money. I'll wire you later." And then Little Miss Vanity Fair says, "Oh, I'll put it on my corporate credit card." And it was like a $60,000 charge because they were like, "We're not letting you leave this hotel till you pay it." And she was like, "Oh, Anna got me. Anna got me good. Anna's the villain." And then we all were like, "Girl, you wanted to go on that trip. Like, you shouldn't have gone if you couldn't afford it." Like, it
Yep.
was kind of this whole crazy thing. So, something that was really interesting, though, about this is why I give all that context, is that woman wrote a book about her experience, right?
Mhm.
And then Lena Dunham actually bought the rights to her side of the story, right? So, like, when this happened and the article comes out in The Cut, that's like Anna's perspective, she basically is like, "Oh, Anna's not going to play me for Boo Boo the Fool." She does an article for Vanity Fair, then she writes the book, and then Lena Dunham buys the rights, and
Mhm.
then the show adaptation that Lena Dunham does ends up not happening. It doesn't
Yep.
happen. So she then gets upset because now we're all watching the Inventing Anna, and she's like, "This isn't real. This is wrong." And da da da. And everyone was like, "Girl, you look like a user. Like you look like you know are not as innocent in this as you purport to
Mhm.
be."
Mhm.
And so something about and the reason I bring all this up and da 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 is like I don't know, there's something interesting about, like, the adaptation of these, like, very real stories
Mhm.
and, like, the ways that, like, there is no, like, fan base to fight for faithfulness, but, like, characters that are involved try to fight for, like,
Mhm.
I was not represented accurately. And I think that as a viewer, like, I don't know about you, but I'm like, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like,
Actually,
that's not why I'm here.
I totally agree, and I think this I didn't put this point in here, but this also is kind of a reason why I think adaptations are becoming so popular and the business behind it
Yeah.
is to your point about that story, it's the messiness. I think
Mhm,
people outside of the 2 parties, this Little Miss Thing and Anna,
mhm,
we don't care.
mhm. Truly don't. I really don't. I'm here for 8 hours,
Yep.
and once those 8 hours are up, if there's another article that drops, yeah, keep me updated, keep me abreast.
We do
Anna got
not.
released from
We do
prison,
not care.
but yeah, sweetie, it just was giving this also weird thing where it was also like you're now negotiating with parts of the source material in real time because she's like screaming like they're doing me dirty, that didn't happen, and all
Mhm.
of us were like, girl, you made money back from the article, from the book.
Mhm.
You got, the corporate, entity basically called fraud on the credit card, so nobody was looking at you to pay back twice your annual salary, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
calm down. But like instead of us arguing with like showrunners by being like, you've made a weird choice, writers at Game of Thrones, I'm just like, girl, we are not arguing with you. We're
But
not
but we
doing
are gonna
it.
do is watch the show though.
And we're gonna have opinions. And I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry Lena didn't make your version, but like I'm not losing sleep over what you feel is a smear campaign on this. And it's interesting though, because like this happens constantly. Pam and Tommy, there was a lot of that one actually is really different. I would like to clarify. I do think this one is a lot different, but like Pamela Anderson, was like, I did not consent to this sex tape being released when it was released.
Mhm.
And I don't really consent to a really traumatic thing happening to me being made into a series for entertainment.
Yeah, that's kind of the overall point I was gonna make about articles adaptation. What
Yeah.
we're sort of learning is like it's a slippery slope,
Hmm.
and it's sort of like it's a mixed bag because aside from because the articles being written are not about stories that come from the minds of the people writing them.
Right.
It opens up a can of worms about the credibility of the stories that are getting picked up. Because to my point just now about what is the business behind these and why they're so popular is the biggest one is not only is are like studios are looking for like the next thing to tell, it's the messiness of it, right? Like
Yeah.
studios are telling these stories because they know like people were hooked on this particular story in culture. And so
Mhm.
like we can repackage this into a narrative and people will watch, right? For better or for worse, right? And I think Hustlers being another one where like again, story being told, the movie was wildly popular when it came out.
Right.
I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
Sis get like a Golden Globe nomination out of this or something like that?
I don't know. I mean, I
Um,
I enjoyed it. I don't know how the awards shook out though.
yeah. But again, wildly popular, but it's a slippery slope because you're gonna get stuff like Inventing Anna or Pam and Tommy, where the people behind it are gonna be like, I don't know if I consent to this, or like if
I
this is accurate.
I think that, and I'm jumping the gun into a different like subgroup, but it touches on this theme. But like I remember I really liked what was that? The Thing About Pam, right? Which
Mhm.
was a Dateline sort of episode that they then fleshed out into a, scripted series. And because it was a Dateline, it was a true crime, right? Like a woman really murdered her friend, allegedly, but I mean, okay. And Renee, it was a show that Renee Zellweger did where she was in the fat suit for anyone who's like, oh yeah, okay, I remember that. I was on TikTok one day and this girl was like basically doing like a straight to camera thing, being like, POV, like your mom's very traumatic murder has been made into a campy, TV show starring Renee Zellweger. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second. And I do think that, like, when we think about, like, these adaptations, I do think that we probably need a different type of care put
Mhm.
into things that are based on true crime and violation of, like, sexual violation, like, physical safety violations, right? Like, murder, like,
Mhm.
that feels very different to me than, like, Inventing Anna, right? Like she was scheming, she was robbing. That also feels very
Yeah.
different than like Theranos, right? With all the like adaptations of, Amanda Seyfried's and then, whatever. Like
Right.
those feel very different to me than a situation like Hustlers where like people were like sort of arguing about like, you know, you can't I mean, it's not even an argument, but like you can't really be drugging people. Like this is
Yeah.
crazy. Pam and Tommy, she didn't consent to that sex tape.
Yeah.
The thing about Pam and like that feels very different to me than like there's a new doc coming out about Black Twitter, right? Where like that's not a crime. Like someone wrote a really interesting 3-part essay on the history of Black Twitter and adapting that into something like great. Like there's no one was
Yeah.
harmed in the making of this retelling.
Yeah, but again, this is why I say it's a slippery slope because
Oh.
you sort of open up a can of worms because studios are just after profit and
Mhm.
subscribers and views. And so once we sort of like set the precedent, and I think the precedent has been set in a lot of these categories where basically what we're saying is it's no longer just books where people do adaptations,
Right.
it's video games. The precedent is set. As soon as people saw how popular The Last of Us was,
I know.
a month later,
Oh my
every
goodness.
studio was like, I'm gonna go buy my own video game to turn into a live action. Articles are the same way, podcasts are the same way. And so what it does is it you're gonna get the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And I think the ugly is gonna be ugly,
Right.
right? But at the end of the day, a lot of these things are because they already come with a sort of fan base. People want these things. That's kind of it at the end of the day. Aside from like I would say um like news pieces, so like that Black Twitter article,
Mhm.
um
Right.
but like the messiness has a fan base, right? I think about like stuff like Serial, their Murdaugh murders, right? Gaslit, which is basically about Watergate, right? And then all the books already have fan bases. The Last of Us already has a fan base. Zola kind of already did. The reason why people went to see that is because they remember the story. It was a
Black
very
Twitter.
like targeted story that was told
Right.
about Black community. And so that's the thing. It's just like, hey, y'all going to see that. So
But I feel like though, like, I don't know, like to your point, like if it's a news story retelling, like the slope is actually not that slippery, right? Like something that's so interesting with like and let's just go ahead and like kind of skip over to like podcast live action, right? Like when we talk about like Serial, right? Like that's been really interesting because like that's done weird things with um the podcast has done weird things with like the actual trial, right? Or not trial,
a
the
hundred
case.
percent,
Right?
a
Like
hundred
he was
percent.
out, now he's back in. I don't even know what's going on there. And then like the Murdoch murders is also interesting because like they did one on HBO that okay, so hold on. This one is kind of interesting and complicated for its own reasons. It starts as a podcast. This woman is like, I I'm a journalist. I'm reporting live, local. This is crazy. Y'all should listen to it. Don't make fun of my vocal fry. Then HBO says, okay, cool. Here's a little miniature situation. Then Netflix goes, okay, cool. Here's a three-parter. And I think the thing that was interesting was like, who said yes to the HBO one versus the Netflix one. And the
Mm-hmm.
Netflix one, it's like all of the kids who were friends with the kid who was, the son of Alec Murdoch, like they all said yes. And
Yeah,
to the Netflix one. So like there also is a little bit of a component here where it's like, okay, well, there's different types of agency because like when it's your story and you're involved in it, that also feels very different
for sure.
as opposed to the HBO one where like none of them were involved. And
Yeah, it
then
was
it's
just like a
also,
retelling.
yeah, it's like a little less interesting because you're kind of like, you're not contextualizing anything new either.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas the, Netflix one, you're picking up on the dynamic of these kids because it's real time and it's also happened a little bit later. And so the trial is still happening. So yeah, I don't know. I think that there's also room to say that in a adaptation of like a nonfiction story, I think it also matters greatly who's involved. And like,
Yeah.
I think about the 1619 Project with Nicole Hannah Jones. I'm like, she wrote the book, she did the podcast, she was involved in the New York Times piece, and she was involved with the docuseries. So sounds all good to me, like I don't know.
I
That's
agree.
my that's my I think like trying to find the lines of demarcation of like ethics and like what's morally
Yeah. It's a gray
acceptable
area sometimes, honestly.
for sure. Um all right, to wrap us up, I feel like we've hit on a lot of things. Is there any adaptation of anything that you would like to see?
Ooh. I think for me, there's some I'm on the big like crusade to tell people that video game writers or real writers and
Okay.
like they be cooking over there.
Come on,
Um
WGA support system.
so I'm on
Big
a big
cap.
like so what I want to see next is some other video games that I know is coming. Particularly there's a video game called God of War that the writing in that game is, oh my god, it's phenomenal. Um, and I know a game has really good writing when like I finish playing the game, I'm looking up who wrote this, and 9 times out of 10, it's like actual writers that like they hired to come write the story. And I think that's gonna do wonders for the video game industry. And I think of it like as a holistic thing because what it opens up is like people that want to get into like that want to work in Hollywood, they'll
Yeah.
have sort of like the Pandora's box open for them where they don't solely have to work on TV shows. If you're really into video games and you want to get into writing for video games, there's a path there. And the work could be just as fulfilling as if you were writing for, any other show. So that's
Okay.
mine.
So you are trying to you're trying to campaign for the video games. Okay.
I sure am.
Okay. Listen, come on, union rep. Like,
Come on.
let's do it. Let's do it.
What about you?
Okay. Um Mine is The Vanishing Half.
Uh-huh.
It was and remains one of the best books I've ever read. Um in 2021, it was actually in development. Aziza Barnes, Jeremy O'Harris were writing it, and then Issa Rae and a woman named Stephanie Elaine, I believe,
Mhm.
they were set to produce it. And it is kind of confusing because the book came out in 2019 or 2020. It was like I listened to it it's like a 12-hour book and I listened to it in 24 hours during early weeks of the lockdown. Shout out to audiobook culture. And it doesn't exist. Jeremy O'Harris is no longer working on it. I know that there were it sounds like some creative differences. But it truly was the best book I've ever read, like, of fiction. Like, wow, iconic, like, obsessed. And I am just devastated that I do not have a visual of this yet. And so I don't know. I hope Issa is still attached. I'm like, girl, I don't know who you and the author Britt Bennett both know, but you need to get it together. Okay. I want everybody to get their bag. And I do think it's kind of interesting because I have very strong personal feelings on the way that Jeremy O. Harris represents and interacts with Black women in work.
Mhm.
And this is a story about Blackness and
Mhm.
trying to one degree escape, but also
Mhm.
to one half like sort of lean in. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if this was the best person for that adaptation. So
I see. Okay.
hopefully we can get someone else in there because the girls, we want to vanish. We want to vanish because the book was booking. So yeah, that's what I need. That's what I need. But all right,
TBD.
well,
We'll
we'll
see.
see. We'll keep our eyes peeled. All right, well, it was good talking, and we'll be back.
Bye.
Bye.